In the winter of 1959, 9 experienced hikers set out into the frozen Ural Mountains of Russia. They never returned. Weeks later, their camp was discovered. And what rescuers found was terrifying. The hikers' tent was slashed open from the inside. Some bodies were found barefoot in the snow, as if they fled in panic. Others showed strange injuries, fractured skulls, missing eyes, even a missing tongue. Their clothes contained traces of radiation. To this day, no one knows what truly happened. Theories range from secret military experiments to UFO encounters to a supernatural presence in the mountains. The chilling truth. The Russian government kept the case classified for decades, and locals still whisper that the hikers were victims of something that should never have been disturbed. Welcome back. I'm here. And yes, we are still in the month of October, which means today is still officially spooky season. So let's talk about one of the most popular unsolved mysteries in all of cryptid lore, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. On February 2nd, 1959, 9 members of the Ural Polytechnic Institute ski club set out on what would be a routine hike through the northern Ural Mountains near the small settlement of Vizhay in northwest Russia. The group consisted of 3 couples, a group of friends who regularly went hiking together, plus the group's instructor and his assistant. All of them were very experienced outdoorsmen, and women with plenty of practice surviving the harsh conditions of the freezing Russian wilderness. The group's goal was Otorten, a peak over 1,400 meters above sea level. That's 4,600 feet for my American friends. But before they reached their goal, they intended to make camp for the night at an area known as the Pastel, which is also known as Dead Man's Lodge. According to the group's plans, they would spend 2 nights at the lodge, skiing and snowboarding down the slopes and enjoying the scenic vistas, then ski the rest of the way back to their cars by February. But the group never made it back to their cars, and their fate would remain a complete mystery for many years. It wasn't unusual for experienced hikers to disappear in the northern Urals. Wildlife was scarce, but hypothermia was always a risk. However, this case was far from typical. 9 days after the group had set out on their hike, 2 skiers named Zinaida Kolmogorova and Yuri Yudin decided to go looking for them when they hadn't returned by their expected date. After trudging through knee-deep snow, they finally spotted the hiker's tent at around 2 p.m. on February. The men assumed that the group must have left early that morning for their final leg back to the cars and began skiing in search of them. But they never found the missing hikers. Instead, they found something that turned their blood cold. When they arrived at the tent, they saw that it had been slashed open from the inside. At first, they assumed that the hikers had probably just packed up and left in a hurry, which didn't really make sense, since there was a storm raging outside, and temperatures had plummeted to 20 degrees Celsius or -4 Fahrenheit. Still, Kolmogorova and Yudin decided to wait in the vicinity of the tent until nightfall, hoping that the group would return. But they never did. By the next morning, Yudin had developed symptoms of frostbite in his feet and hands, and he and Kolmogorova were forced to turn back and seek help. They returned to the tent to find that it had been covered in a layer of snow overnight, and there was no sign of their friends. Now worried that something was wrong, Yudin decided to cut the tent open so he could look inside. What he saw was horrifying. Inside the tent, he found the frozen corpses of the group's 3 female hikers. All 3 were completely naked, except for their socks, and one was kneeling like she was praying. Disturbed but desperate to find the rest of the group, Yudin and Kolmogorova continued searching. They soon found the bodies of the 3 male hikers not far from the tent, but they had also disappeared without their clothing. Only one of the bodies had shoes on, and none of them had belts. The only clue as to what might have happened was a small gash on the back of one of the men's heads, which seemed to have been caused by some sort of sharp object. Kolmogorova and Yudin reported their gruesome discovery to the authorities. Colonel Semyon Ivanov and a team of soldiers were sent to investigate, But they soon found themselves baffled by the bizarre circumstances surrounding the deaths of the hikers. To make matters worse, Soviet authorities immediately confiscated all of the evidence and sealed the area off from the public, claiming that it was state property and prohibited to enter. However, news of the mysterious deaths leaked out anyway, and rumors began to spread that the hikers had been murdered by a secretive military unit conducting chemical weapons tests in the region. This was later confirmed by a report written by Major Ivan Teryoshkin, the head of the search team, which stated that the tent's canvas showed signs of having been cut with a sharp blade or scissors, and that the hikers had fled the tent in terror, leaving their equipment behind. Teryoshkin also noted that some of the bodies showed signs of trauma, including a skull fracture and missing eyes, although these injuries weren't consistent among all the bodies. The X-rays performed on the bodies revealed that several of the hikers had died as a result of mechanical impact to the head. 2 of them had also suffered serious chest trauma, while 1 woman had died from a stab wound in her chest. 1 man had even had part of his tongue torn off. And to make things even weirder, traces of gamma radiation were found on the clothing of several of the bodies. Despite all of these clues, the investigation quickly hit a dead end. The major concluded that the most likely explanation for the strange circumstances surrounding the death of the group was that they had been experimenting with hallucinogenic substances, which caused them to panic and flee the tent in the middle of the night. The head of the regional medical examiner agreed, citing the lack of any other obvious cause of death, the strange behavior of cutting off their own clothing, and their traumatic injuries. But this explanation never sat well with the families of the victims or the public. Conspiracy theories abounded, suggesting that the hikers had stumbled upon a top-secret military base or had been caught in the crossfire of a military test. There were even rumors that the hikers had encountered extraterrestrials, which is how we got the UFO angle. Soviet officials kept the case under wraps for nearly 30 years, releasing no information to the public. In 1989, however, files on the incident were declassified and released to the public. Unfortunately, the documents added more questions than answers. Not only did they reveal that the group had been exposed to radiation, which is why their bodies had shown such strange injuries, they also showed that the official cause of death remained undetermined. To this day, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains officially unsolved, though most agree that the most plausible explanation is that the hikers encountered an avalanche, which may have been triggered by an earthquake. Some believe that they survived the initial slide but perished as temperatures rose and the snow melted, trapping them in a layer of ice. This may explain why some bodies were found without clothing and why others had strange injuries consistent with drowning. This theory is supported by the fact that avalanches frequently occur in the area, and there was a strong earthquake in the Ural Mountains on February 1959. Unfortunately, this doesn't explain why the tent had been cut open from the inside, nor does it explain the higher-than-normal levels of radiation found in the area. Since the incident was first investigated in the late 1950s, more than 200 expeditions have attempted to solve the mystery of what happened at Dyatlov Pass, but none have ever come up with definitive answers. And so the conspiracy theories persist. Some believe that the group encountered a secret military base or test site and were vaporized by a beam weapon or some other experimental technology. Others believe that they were sacrificed by a religious sect, while still others insist that the group was abducted by aliens. And according to some accounts, the locals believe that the entire ordeal was the result of a curse placed on the mountain by an evil spirit. In 2020, scientists from the Russian Academy of Sciences claimed to have solved the mystery once and for all. Using modern technology to re-examine the evidence, they came to the conclusion that the strange injuries found on the victims were not consistent with any conventional weapon. Instead, they suggested that the injuries were consistent with exposure to ultrasonic radiation. This would explain the high levels of radiation found on the victims' clothing and the strange absence of physical trauma on their bodies. Unfortunately, this new revelation has only opened up more questions. What kind of weapon causes this type of damage? Who was responsible? And what was the purpose? The Dyatlov Pass Incident is one of the most popular unsolved mysteries in cryptid lore, and perhaps one of the most terrifying, because unlike most cryptids, whatever killed the Dyatlov hikers may still be out there. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please stay tuned for more stories of mystery, fear, and the unexplained. And as always, thanks for watching.